Hello, everyone. It's Gordon Causey again. Clean shaven, the clean shaven version. And Candy the Wonder Pup, as always. Thank you for watching. Today, it is the 6th of May. I see I have someone watching. The live chat is on. Haven't been on for a few days. I'm going to hide the CTV corporate logo. I have never worked for CTV. It was a golf tournament I was in probably 20 odd years ago. That was sponsored by one of their anchors. A gentleman ran a charity golf event, and I went and played and won once. And this was part of the stuff they gave you. So, yeah. It's got a CTV, I can't even get the right side, CTV logo on it, which I'm not a fan of CTV, never have been. Townhouse Gardener says, hi, Gordon. Thanks for jumping on with me, Townhouse. I've been away for a few days. Life gets busy, but let me take care of Candy before she lay down. Speak. There we go. Close enough. There you go. Candy's taken care of. Just wanted to cover off a few points. I forget what I titled this. Something to the effect of, asking the question, is something big coming? And I get the distinct impression that there is. I got to shave this head again. I don't look good with hair. If you look at my videos back from December of 2023 and earlier, it was pretty much always shaved down to the wood. Looks so much better. And I want to do it again, but it takes time. So I just wrote down a few little bullet points on what's happening in the world right now. Number one, it seems like within the last few hours that it's the early morning hours now in Israel, in the Middle East. The sun is coming up in the Middle East. And Israel has apparently launched its ground invasion of Rafah, this southern enclave in the Gaza Strip, to which so many people have been pushed by the fighting, by the war that has been ravaging the Gaza Strip. And from what I understand, the IDF has told the residents, the civilian population in Gaza who are in and around Rafah, to evacuate to an area near the coast, near the Mediterranean Sea. And the talking point is that they want to eradicate the last remaining battalions of Hamas's military, of their, although, calling it a military, I think, is stretching things. This is a symmetrical war, but the Hamas has fighters, and they will have, I imagine they have machine guns, they have rocket launchers, perhaps RPGs, they have ordnance, maybe mortars. And so I know that in an asymmetrical war, that it is de rigueur, it's to be expected that the militants will embed themselves within civilian populations. But if you're carrying a machine gun, AK-47, M16, whatever, whatever iteration of a machine gun that they have, that's hard to conceal. And obviously, things like rocket-propelled grenades and mortars and things like that are even harder to conceal. So we'll see how things play out. The reporting had been, 12, 14 hours ago, that Qatar and Egypt had proposed a ceasefire of sorts, and Hamas had agreed to it. And I had people saying to me, it's going to be over. Hamas has agreed to the peace deal. Well, the peace deal was something put forward, proposed by Qatar and Egypt. Hamas accepted it, but I do not believe Israel has. Apparently, it did not meet their conditions. Whatever. It looks like the war is going to another level. And, just continuing on with Israel, I haven't talked about it much. I've talked about it before, but this red heifer sacrifice. I'm hearing other voices now saying that everything about the red heifer, that it's all a red herring, that it's, don't pay attention to it. It's just to distract, that it's a big nothing burger, and that it's being used by the Palestinians as a, that it's more or less, a propaganda tool of the Palestinian side. Townhouse Gardener asks the question, why do I suppose Israel never agrees to any conditions of any ceasefire? Well, they did have a ceasefire, I think it was back in November, and it lasted a few weeks, and some hostages were released, like 3-1 for every one Israeli hostage that was released. I think it was roughly 3 Palestinian prisoners, prisoners, people held in prisons and detained in Israel were released. The rhetoric we're hearing out of Israel is that they have 2 major conditions. One, they want the return of all hostages. And number 2, they want, their ultimate goal in this is to eliminate Hamas, to have Hamas no longer capable. Go away, Candy. Go lay down. That they have, they want to eliminate Hamas's capacity. They want to eliminate Hamas so that they'll never again be able to launch an attack like what happened on October 7th. I've already made my views on that clear. I think that Israel had the capacity. They could have stopped that attack on October 7th. But rather than stopping it, I think there was more or less, and this is just an opinion, I think they stood down to enable Hamas to gain a small victory, to kill 1,000 plus Israelis, take 200 plus hostage, that they allowed them that small victory in order to win a larger war. And I've always viewed this going back, if you talked to me in the 80s or 90s or even early 2000s, I would have been far more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. I didn't know nearly as much of the history as I know now. Gearcom says pretext for the oil, this idea that there has been the discovery of either both natural gas and oil. I know natural gas, probably oil too, offshore in the Mediterranean, offshore the Gaza Strip. And when it comes to warfare, I tend to view things that there's never one singular objective. I see typically what you have is a convergence of objectives. When the United States went into Afghanistan, why? What was the pretext? What was the reason? I think there were a number of reasons why the U.S. went into Afghanistan. Number one, it's geopolitically very important in that it touches Pakistan, it touches China, it touches Iran, Turkmenistan. And it's kind of like the hub of a wheel. Afghanistan has all these countries around it. So geopolitically, it's important. 2, there are a lot of resources there. One of this said to be lithium is in abundance in Afghanistan. So there's another reason. 3rd reason is it's a big, chance for the industrial military complex to sell their wares to the United States and any of the other coalition countries that were engaged in that conflict. It was a chance to go. I think the Chinese genuinely were supporting the Afghans, the Taliban and such. And so it's a power play. I think there's a lot when a war happens. I think that it's never just one. Townhouse Gardner names it as the Gaza Marine Project. And I think that very well could be one element. Is it the sole element? No, I don't think it's the sole element. People have made reference to something called the Ben Gurion Canal. And this is, I've read up a bit on that. And it has been proposed going all the way back, I believe, to the 60s to create an alternative shipping route from in and around Gaza to build a la the Panama Canal, make a man-made canal going down into the Red Sea so that you could bypass the Suez Canal. And, and again, this has been a proposal that has been talked about going back over 50 years. Could that be an element of it? I think that's certainly possible. I think another element of it is the fact that Israel genuinely wants to occupy Gaza, not just as an occupying force, but they want Gaza and the West Bank to be Israel proper. They don't want these to be occupied territories. They want them to be Israeli territories for Israeli citizens. When Egypt conquered the Gaza Strip after the 1948-49 First Arab-Israeli War, the war that Israelis refer to it as their war of independence, like the U.S. War of Independence. They view the 1948-49 war from May 15th, 1948 until March of 1949. I don't have a definitive date for when the war ended because there were 5 invading nations of the Arab League. And over a period of days, probably weeks, Israel, this new nation state, signed armistice agreements with Egypt, with Syria, with Lebanon, with Jordan, and probably Saudi Arabia as well, although Saudi's troops that they sent were under the command of the Egyptians. So they signed an agreement here. I don't think it all took place on one day. So the war ended in March of 1949. And after that war had ended, Egypt had control of the Gaza Strip. And they ethnically cleansed it of its Jewish population after Israel established itself as a country. At the conclusion of that war, many of the Arab countries in the world, Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, these countries expelled their Jewish populations. There was a mass influx of Jewish people from throughout the Middle East who were expelled from the countries where they had been living, in some cases, for centuries. And they came to Israel because it was the one country in the world where they could go and feel safe. And the Jewish population grew exponentially. And again, Gaza was Egyptian territory. And then Israel conquered it. Egypt conquered it after that first war. Israel conquered it after the 1967 war. They captured both Gaza and the West Bank, as well as East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. So that 1967 war, which maybe I should do a video just on that 1967 war because it's fascinating. I think Israel punches way above its weight. And I think it's forgotten by a lot of people that Israel, it's not like the Americans sent troops or Britain or Canada or New Zealand, Australia, anyone. It was them fighting themselves against, in 1948-49, it was 5 invading nations. And remember, we're not talking about the people, the former Islamic Palestinians, because anyone who was living in that area, in the area that we call Israel today, including Gaza and the West Bank, from 1920 to 1948, everyone was Palestinian, whether they were Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Druze, whatever. Everyone's a Palestinian. And then after, on May 15th, 1948, that political entity known as the British Mandate of Palestine ceased to exist. Britain abandoned the mandate. And they said, we're done with it. And they walked away. And they abandoned it. And a war broke out between the Jewish population that lived there and 5 nations of the Arab League. There were in and around 800,000 Jews. That's probably on the high end. I've read 700 to 800,000. Maybe a better guesstimate would say 750, but whatever the number was. And that there were about 1.2 million Arab former or Islamic Palestinians. So you had 800,000 for Jewish former Palestinians and about 1.2 million former Arab formerly Palestinians. They're all Palestinians. Palestine, it's not a people. To say Palestinian, it's not a people. It designated a land area. If I lived in Quebec, am I a Quebecer all of a sudden? A Quebecois? These terms get difficult. The people who lived in Egypt, or rather the people who lived in Gaza from 1949 until 1967, the people living in Gaza were Egyptians. From 1949 until 1967, the people living in the West Bank were Jordanians. And then sometime later, when this idea of, this whole Palestinian identity, to a degree, in a fashion, it's somewhat like the Zionist identity. Jews have always identified with what they call the land of Zion, and they are called Zionists. And there are Arabs who identify with a part of the world that is alternately called Palestine, so they call themselves Palestinian. But it's not, it's not an ethnic group. It's predominantly Islamic, just like Zionists are predominantly Jewish. But I'm going all over the place. I was talking about the red heifers. One thing that struck me is, and others probably have this experience as well, when you search out items, the algorithms on YouTube feed you content based on what they think you'll like, or probably based on AI, what they know you'll like and what they know you will engage with. And so I get a lot of content on the red heifer. And quite often these videos are titled something to the effect of the red heifer sacrifice has begun, or is about to start, or is a day away, or all manner of things like this. And guilty as charged, I click on them, listen, and I think genuinely that I'm probably looking at a video that's been generated by ChatGPT, by artificial intelligence. And they're just mashing together some images, and it's that computerized voice. Instead of saying heifer, it says heifer or hofer, because the AI hasn't figured out how to pronounce the word heifer, because it's not a common word in the English language. A heifer is just a female cow that has not yet calved, that hasn't given birth to offspring. I'm going to read. Townhouse says, Jews and Zionists are two different things. People live in Palestine. Well, there is no more Palestine. That's the thing. Palestine ceased to exist in 1949. When the Jordanians captured the West Bank, they didn't call it Palestine. It was called Jordan. It was part of Jordan. When the Egyptians captured Gaza, it wasn't Palestine. It was part of Egypt. So Palestine as an entity ceased to exist in 1949. It became either Jordan, Egypt, or Israel. Those were the three countries. The former British Mandate of Palestine, which was vacated, which was left abandoned on May 15th, 1948. A war broke out, and Egypt took a section, and it made it part of Egypt. Jordan took a section. Actually, they took two, East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and they made it part of Jordan. And the rest fell to the Jews, the remainder, and they called their part Israel. So there's never been, since 1949, a place called Palestine, actually since May 15th, 1948, because the British actually put an expiry date on their mandate. It was created in 1920, and they said on May 15th, 1948, our mandate for Palestine is over. We had the mandate for Mesopotamia. It became Iraq. The French had a mandate for Syria. It did become Syria. And they had a mandate for Lebanon. It did become Lebanon. But, you know, these are just labels that get stuck on things. The British stick labels on everything. Up in northern Canada, we have a territory called Nunavut. And the capital of Nunavut is called Iqaluit. And Iqaluit used to be called Frobisher Bay. Frobisher was a British explorer, you know, like Franklin and the rest, and Fraser and Thompson, these guys who went out and explored the Canadian hinterland in the north. So Frobisher Bay was named after the British explorer Frobisher, but now the name has been changed to Iqaluit. Bombay, what was formerly Bombay in India, is now Mumbai. You know, these names, Frobisher Bay, Bombay, Palestine, are anachronisms. They're out of time. It's 2024. What are you talking about? Townhouse Gardener says, of course, Palestine exists. Sure. Like it exists the same way that Bombay exists. It exists the same way that Iqaluit exists. You know, if you want to pretend that India still controls, or rather Britain still controls India, and that city is still called Bombay, you're welcome to. If you want to pretend that Britain still has a mandate over Palestine and still call it Palestine, then everyone living there is Palestinian. The Jews, the Arabs, the Druze, the Christians, everyone who lives there is Palestinian. Actually, everyone who lives in Israel proper right now, regardless of whether they're Jewish, Christian, Druze, or whatever, if they live in Israel proper, like if they live in Tel Aviv, they're Israelis. Maybe an Arab Israeli, there might be a Druze Israeli, a Christian Israeli, but they're Israelis. They carry an Israeli passport, not a Palestinian passport, because there is no more Palestine. So, I mean, it's just a label. It's just a label that got stuck onto that territory. But moving on, you know. So I don't know what to, in terms of the red heifer sacrifice, I don't know what to think with that. I'm tending to kind of just put it aside for now. I'm not going to completely ignore it, but at the same time, I'm not going to attach much significance to it unless or until something actually happens, until there's the actual sacrifice of one of these red heifers. Because there's two sides. One says ignore it completely, it means nothing. And another side says it has huge significance. I think it's somewhere in the middle, because the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, funded by the Israeli government, although not much, they get a few $100,000 from the Israeli government. So they are financed. It's a significant amount of money, but nothing huge. And they imported 5 red heifers from Texas, and 4 of them apparently still qualify for the sacrifice. They still meet the Masoretic or the Midrashian Torah requirements for being a suitable sacrifice to take place. Apparently, multiple sources, the land to conduct the sacrifice on the Mount of Olives, just outside, looking down upon the Temple Mount, the land has been purchased. Everything appears, but now we're kind of in a holding pattern. So I'm just going to go into a holding pattern myself on the red heifers and leave it aside until or unless something happens. But then there's more happening in the world. There was a video that came out within the last 12 hours or so by John Campbell, one of my favorite YouTube channels to watch. Dr. John Campbell, John Campbell, Campbell, just like Campbell's soup. And he's got a new one out, and the title of it is New RNA Vaccines Coming. And it's a short 11, 12-minute video, and he has Bill Gates. He has Bill Gates, one of his TED Talks, and he's talking, there's this guy with no medical background, no scientific degrees, he's talking like he knows everything about drug development and such, and about how we can expect vaccine mRNA or RNA vaccines to be made available over the next 5 years for all manner of things, perhaps cancers. He mentions malaria. He mentions AIDS. Talks about the COVID shots as if they were the great savior of mankind. And something struck me in watching that little clip on John Campbell's YouTube station. And it's this. Bill Gates is talking about global health. That vaccines are essential for global health. Doesn't say human health. He says global health. And most will acknowledge that Bill Gates is a globalist. And it's a widely held belief among globalists, I would put forward, that human beings, that we are a threat to planet Earth, to the globe, that there are too many human beings, and so we are a threat to the health of the globe. So if you talk about global health, if you want to ensure global health, you need to depopulate, which brings to mind the old Georgia Guidestones that were blown up in, I think it was August of 2022, I think it was 2022 or 2023. Built in 1980, the Stonehenge of America, that got no press coverage ever except when they got blown up. And then it was on ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox, all the news stations covered it when they were blown up. And they had all these guiding principles, 10 guiding principles. Number one was to maintain human population under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. And number two was to guide human reproduction wisely so as to improve diversity and fitness. And the whole idea of guiding human reproduction is the basis of something called eugenics, which is something the Nazis were big into. This idea of breeding human beings the way that cattle and racehorses and such are bred. And they want to extend that same paradigm to the human race. And so, and now there's talk of a new alphabet soup of COVID variants coming out. They put a new acronym called FLIRT, F-L, capital F, capital L, small I, R, capital T, FLIRT. And they're saying there's these new variants, but that they can come out with an updated version of the COVID vaccines, which still, if they'd been properly developed, would still be in the trial phase. And I I would contend that they never would have gotten out of a properly conducted phase 1 trial. Phase 1 is safety, phase 2 is efficacy, phase 3 is is the trial that goes toward getting FDA EMA approval. I'm going to read what Townhouse Gardener is saying. It's going back to Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu mandated every single Israeli citizen to get vaccinated. And I'm not standing up for Netanyahu. I'm not standing up for Netanyahu. I genuinely believe that October 7th, that it was Hamas, however you want to say it, that they did plan and want to inflict pain and damage and death on Israel. They want it wiped out from the river to the sea. But at the same time, I will contend that Israel, through their IDF, through their security and intelligence services, that they were more than capable of stopping that attack, of preventing it from happening, of putting it down before it blew up into what it became. I think Netanyahu and his ultra right-wing hawkish coalition basically stood down. I'm reminded of, many will know of it, Operation Northwoods, and you can look that up. It was a clandestine. It was a psychological operation, more than that. That was put forward by the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States in the 60s during the Kennedy administration. And they put forth this operation, and it called on acts of terrorism to be committed by the United States against itself, to crash airplanes into buildings, to sink ships, and to commit other acts of domestic terrorism in order to justify the invasion of Cuba. And it's written in I have the book. I'd have to dig through some boxes to find it, but the book is called Body of Secrets, and it's written by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist by the name of Bamford, B-A-M-F-O-R-D. And through declassified FOIA, Freedom of Information request inquiries, he was able to gain access to these documents that showed that this Operation Northwoods was real. And it was, the reporting in his book is that the Kennedy administration, they don't know whether it got as high as John F. Kennedy himself, but that the civilian administration in the Kennedy administration spiked it, killed it, done. It's not going forward. That would be a classic false flag operation involving if that operation had gone forward, that would have been the United States committing acts of terrorism against themselves and then blaming the Cubans for it in order to get American public will and international public will on side to support a war of invasion against Cuba. Cuba, which had been the playground of the CIA and the American mafia, Costa Nostra, Cuba, they loved that. The U.S. loved having Cuba there because it allowed the CIA to conduct its operations outside of U.S. territory, and so not subject to U.S. law and the U.S. Constitution. And they hated losing it, and they wanted it back. So they had this idea. In the case of October 7th, I don't think that the attack that took place on Israel, that it was Israeli armed services themselves attacking their own. I think what happened was they knew that Hamas was planning this, and that they had the infrastructure and the capacity and the capability to push it down and make sure it never happened, but that a series of, they say, well, they were intelligence failures, they were operational failures. There were all these multitude of failures that allowed Hamas to do what they did. I think and I want to make this point very clear, especially for you, Townhouse Gardener. I was not a fan of George W. Bush. I'm not a fan of Joe Biden. I'm not a fan of Justin Trudeau. But that doesn't mean that I'm anti-Canadian or anti-American. You can be anti-Justin Trudeau and be pro-Canadian and support Canada and the right of Canada to exist. And likewise, you can be anti-Benjamin Netanyahu, but still support Israel. The same way you can be anti-Joe Biden, but still support the United States of America. What I say here, what I think, what I believe, and what I say here on my useless little YouTube channel is not going to change anything one way or the other. I think we'd all agree with that. And so we all know, many will know, that Benjamin Netanyahu, just prior to October 7th, was due to be indicted on a number of corruption charges. And there was the potential that if found guilty, he could be spending time in jail. I think those corruption inquiries, trial, whatever legal machinations have to go on, I think they should go forward. But well, we're in war. I mean, it's kind of like the COVID era. Well, we can't justify the emergency. We can't justify. I remember there was a case in BC where churches, 4 or 5 churches, banded together and they wanted to force the BC health ministry to justify their declaration of a health emergency and to prove the necessity with empirical data and statistics and facts. And the health ministry came back and said, we can't do it. We don't have time. There's an emergency going on. It's kind of the same idea. And anyway, just going on to what Bill Gates' father was into eugenics too. So is Planned Parenthood. Absolutely. What's that woman's name? I can't remember her name. The founder of Planned Parenthood. That's eugenics on steroids. And then Townhouse Gardener writes, you don't believe that Israel committed acts of terrorist against itself to justify what it's doing right now? Hear me out, okay, Townhouse? You're asking me, you don't believe that Israel committed acts of terrorism against itself to justify what it's doing right now? No, I do not, because I don't think they had to. I do believe that Hamas, I do not believe they were created by Israel. I do think Israel built them up, but I think they are genuinely committed to killing all the Jews in Israel, to wiping Israel off the map from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. But I also think Israel is so strong that they could have easily suppressed that attack, but rather than suppressing it, they allowed it to go forward, stand down. They stood down their forces. They committed all manner of operational and security lapses intentionally to enable that attack to go forward, so that then they would have the excuse to do what they are doing. So we do agree somewhat, but I don't think Israel did it to itself. They didn't have to. They allowed it to happen. I want to punch you out, but you're twice my size, and so you can't beat me up. You can't beat me up, because everyone will say Townhouse is 6'8". Kazi's only, he's under 6 foot. Townhouse is 280 pounds. Kazi is 210. Like, it's not a fair fight. So you can't beat me up, otherwise you're going to look bad. But you know that I hate your guts. You know that I hate your guts. You know I want to take you down. So you sit there and you when I punch, where you could just put it aside, you let me bloody your lip, bloody your nose, so that now you can do to me what you wanted to, pound the crap out of me. That's genuine in a nutshell. It's not the best analogy, but that's what I think happened. Anyway, going on. Then Townhouse Gardener says, and I think he got his army to orchestrate this to get the pressure off him, so they didn't. I think that's one aspect of it. It gets back to my idea that in war, there's never one singular objective. There's a multiple of objectives, and I'll allow that if not the main objective, it certainly is, a very good selling point on why to go forward with allowing Hamas to get away with what they got away with, to the detriment of Israeli citizens. They had these women, primarily women, I think it's all women, who were basically left hung out to dry, who their job was they were near the border fence and they were monitoring and they saw what was coming and they called for support and nothing came. They were sacrificed. They were sacrificial lambs. And now Israel is able to use those, typically very attractive young Jewish girls to look at what they did to our beautiful young Jewish women. Look at what they did. Well, why didn't you stop it? You could have, but instead, we were just slow in responding. It was an operational failure. It was an intelligence failure. Bull crap. Hamas did what they wanted to do, but Israel could have stopped them. Margaret Sanger, he gave me the name of the woman who started Planned Parenthood. Someone worth reading up on. I've read enough already. Anyway, so, we have all that going on. And what's happening? Look at this. Townhouse Gardener and I, to a degree, although I appreciate him so much. Her, if I remember right. Don't want to get my pronouns wrong. He or her, those are the only two choices. But we have disagreeing opinions. Townhouse tends to think that Israel did it to themselves. I think they just got out of the way. I mean, ultimately, the end game is the same either way, whether it was Israel doing it to itself or just allowing Hamas to do what it wanted to do. The end result is the same. So, but getting us to fight with each other, well, George Carlin put it best. They, anything they can do to divide us, race, religion, sexual orientation, and he lists all these things that divide us, all these divisions to keep us fighting with each other so they can keep going to the bank. We're fighting over, we've got these protests taking place at Columbia, at Yale, now in Canada, at the U of T, at McGill. I think UBC has them as well. I've read that other campuses are planning to have their version, copycat. They want to have their, big encampments on their campuses. There was an interesting article written in I think it was the National Post, it doesn't matter. A University of Toronto professor went into the encampment, the pro-Palestinian encampment, somewhat undercover. And his observation was that hardly anyone or nobody was actually attached to the University of Toronto, that they weren't students, faculty, or staff, that they were more or less professional protesters. And it's come out as well, widely reported, that at least some of the financing for these protests are coming from the Rockefeller Foundation and George Soros. And to make sense to me, because it just gets us fighting with each other, just gets us arguing with each other. And there's so much going on. And this is why I think something big is coming. We're all fixating on Israel. Yeah, Townhouse Gardener, her, I got to remember that. Gardener, women are thought to more typically be into gardening than men. There's a sexist stereotype for an old guy. Any day now, within another week or two, there's going to be something they're calling cicada-geddon. Cicadas are these beetle-like flying insect that are probably about the shape of a silver, or about the size of a silver dollar, and like a big moth, but different from a moth, like a cross between a moth and a beetle. And when their wings vibrate, they make an electrical, almost a hum. And we've all probably heard it. I know I have. And it goes up and down, and apparently it can be quite loud. And what happens is there are broods. There's one brood that comes out of hibernation every 13 years. Another one comes out every 17 years. And then there are others that come out annually or semi-annually, more regularly. But these 13-year broods and these 17-year broods are massive in size, and they're due to come out together. And this is the first time that these two broods have come out together in the United States since 1803, when Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States. And Jefferson actually wrote about them, but he didn't call them cicadas. He called them locusts, which makes it almost biblical. And apparently this hum noise that they make when their wings are going it may be loud enough to cause ear damage. I don't know what the decibel level is, 120, 140, 200, I don't know the numbers. But I've read that, with that many of them coming out and that many wings vibrating, that it could potentially cause ear damage. And from what I understand, you need about 2 weeks of temperatures in and around 65 degrees Fahrenheit or better. Once you get 65 degrees for about a 2-week period, then they start digging themselves out from underground. They fly into the air. They live for a couple weeks. They flap their wings, make this annoying little noise, electrical sounding. They have sex. They die. And then the larva or whatever falls to the ground, and it buries itself in the ground. And then it attaches itself to the larvae, attach themselves to roots. And then the process begins again. And some will come out in 13 years from now, and another group in 17. And it'll be another couple hundred years before the two converge again. I'm going to read up. Townhouse Gardener says, if they keep us busy fighting against ourselves, we won't join together and fight against them. That's the divide and conquer strategy. And for what it's worth, I think that was part of the rationale with building up Hamas, is that there's a group to counteract the Yasser Arafat's PLO. So we'll build them up so the PLO and Hamas will be fighting against each other to be the standard bearer of the Palestinian movement, and they'll be less effective against us. And the same thing plays against us. Townhouse says, and why do you think George Soros, who is a Jew, he's a Jew born in Hungary, said to have been a Holocaust survivor from when he was an infant? And you nailed it. Why do I think he would fund these kinds of protests? Just because someone's Jewish doesn't mean they're a Zionist. And on top of that, even if they are a Zionist, this conflict that's going on between the Arab Palestinians against the Jewish Palestinians, I mean, if we're going to use that term Palestinian, it's basically, it ultimately boils down to, it's a religious conflict. You have to understand, Hamas, Houthis, and Hezbollah are all proxy groups of Iran. Iran is a fundamentalist, it's a theocracy. It's run by the Ayatollahs under their brand of Shia Islam. And the Shia view themselves as being the true standard bearers of the Islamic faith. They consider Sunnis to be poor cousins, if you will. And it's similar to what we have in Christianity, where you have Catholics who say, oh, you have to follow the Pope. Well, and you have others who say, no, you don't follow the Pope. Well, in Islam, you have the Shia, and they believe that it's through blood descendants of Muhammad that the leadership of the Islamic faith falls. It has to go to a blood descendant of Muhammad, whereas the Sunnis, who are in more prominent in places like Saudi Arabia, the Sunnis believe that it's a spiritual office and that you don't have to be a blood descendant of Muhammad. And so that's the division. And so in Iran, where they have Sharia law, where women have to have their faces covered, where if you're, good luck if you're a homosexual, homosexuals, death sentence. It's so ironic to see the gays supporting a free Palestine. Ultimately, they're backing Iran's side in this, and Iran is a fundamentalist Shia theocracy that does not respect the right of an individual to engage in anything other than heterosexual marriage or heterosexual relations within a sanctified and Islamically sanctified marriage. But so the cicada-geddon, I haven't been seeing a lot of reporting on it, but I'm kind of curious to see what happens, given especially that Thomas Jefferson, when it happened in his lifetime, how many years, 220 whatever years ago, he wrote in his memoirs, and he referred to the cicadas as locusts. And it's not going to be across the entire United States. I think Ohio is something of the Ohio, Indiana, Midwest is kind of the ground zero. And those are large population states, Indiana and Ohio. Not as big as California, not as big as New York, but they're still substantial. Countess Gardner says the bugs are disgusting. I was down in New Jersey in 1993, 1994, I forget. I went back to my old hometown of Glen Rock, New Jersey. We had the town has a county park with a large, long walking trail or biking trail on it. And I was going down memory lane. I was down in New York, and I decided, to go back to Glen Rock, town I'd lived in for I lived in the area from kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I was there from 1970 to 1975. Wanted to see it. And I went to that county park and I went walking, and the cicada hum was going. And I actually had, and it's trees galore, big, massive elms and oaks and maples everywhere, majestic. You can't even see the sky. Well, they were falling out of the trees, and a couple of them hit me, just bounced off me, and then they just basically die on the ground. But gross. And they died just after doing that which comes naturally. They should have been sitting there smoking a little cigarette because they just procreated. Lovely. It was gross. And Townhouse Gardner says, that was supposed to say George Soros, who is a Jew, would fund, not find. Oh, okay. Yeah. That's my take. Why would he fund it? There's this whole notion of something called Greater Israel. I mean, I try and look at things from both perspectives. In 1948, 1949, during that war, the former British mandate for Palestine, what was up for grabs, what the Jewish people of the former mandate of Palestine were fighting for. They were fighting against Egyptians, Syrians, Lebanese, Jordanians, and Saudis. They were all this formerly British territory, they were all fighting to get a piece of it. And Jordan captured the West Bank, and they said, that's ours. That's Jordan now. They added it to their country. And the Jewish people said, no, they wanted it. They were fighting for that as well. That was just an area that they failed to win. Likewise with Gaza. Egypt got a hold of Gaza. The Jews got the remainder. And East Jerusalem fell to East Jordan, or fell to the Jordanians as well. So, but there's this notion of what I'll call Greater Israel, where there are, and I think a lot of these people are in Netanyahu's cabinet. They want to see Israel expand to include, not just occupy the West Bank, but to, they want to do what Jordan did. They want to ethnically, I genuinely believe they want to do what Jordan and Egypt did in 1948, 1949, ethnically cleanse the territory they acquired and populate it with their own citizens, people who are loyal to the nation state of Israel. And so by fomenting this war, gets us fighting with each other, and it emboldens the Palestinian world, the Arab world, to go at Israel. And then possibly every time they fight a war, they establish themselves 1948, 49. 1967 war came along and they expanded. They got Gaza, West Bank, Golan Heights. So, and then 1973, there was a surprise attack by Syria and I think Jordan. It was definitely Syria. I think it was 2 against 1, and Israel defended itself that time. It didn't acquire any new territory. But every time there seems to be a war, Israel has a good chance of expanding its territory. In 1967, they also captured the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, but they later gave it back. 1978 or 1979 Camp David peace accords between with U.S. President Jimmy Carter, Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Interestingly, Anwar Sadat said, we'll take back the Sinai Peninsula. In exchange, we will recognize Israel's right to exist. Israel also offered him back the Gaza Strip, and Anwar Sadat and his team said, no, we don't want that. You keep Gaza. We don't want it. And what I have read on it, it's that Egypt regarded the population in Gaza as being too militant, too extremist, too attached to a group called the Muslim Brotherhood, from which Hamas sprang. And they saw the Muslim Brotherhood and what is now called Hamas, they saw that as too destabilizing a force. So they said, you keep Gaza, but we will take the Sinai Peninsula back. And the Sinai Peninsula is very sparsely populated. It maybe in the whole territory, and the whole territory is probably close to the size, about half the size of Israel, I think. And I think it's got less than 100,000 people in the whole territory. It's very sparsely populated. Anyway, just gonna read on. Townhouse Gardener says, okay, but in the Bible, Torah, it says that you shouldn't be with the same sex partner. It's not just Islam that says that. True. The only question is, in Israel, you don't get killed for being caught committing a homosexual act. You don't get killed in Canada, the United States. Heck, we throw parades. Good luck with that in Tehran. Good luck with that in Riyadh. In a lot of the Islamic world, we're much more tolerant. But it must be remembered, of course, Jesus brought a new covenant. We're no longer subject to the law that was written of in the Torah. Jesus represents the fulfillment of the law. And so the notion of repentance is part of the Christian message, whereas both Islam and Judaism ascribe to an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. Catching up. And Townhouse Gardener thinks that Soros is just some type of disturber, a manure disturber. I'm trying not to swear. Soros is the biggest divider and conqueror there is. He's also behind the BLM movement, true. He also finances BLM, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. Not allowed to say that, but I'll say it anyway. The feminist movement and the little groups that cause trouble. This is, we are having, I would highly recommend, I already recommended, John Campbell's latest video, new RNA vaccines coming. My friend now, I'm much more comfortable now calling my friend George Antonios. His station, Counsel and Might, COUNSEL and Might. He just put out a video within the last 10 hours. I put it out Monday afternoon. And he was talking about mass migration and the reasons behind it. And what's interesting is George himself is someone who has emigrated to Canada from Lebanon as an adult. So but he's talking about mass migration and what it's doing to the culture, what it's doing to our society, how it is, and it's by design. It is by design. They're breaking down this Western world. And one of the ways they can achieve that is to have us fighting over everything, fighting over mandates, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, then get us fighting over gender by indoctrinating our youth to believe that gender is just a societal construct and it's what you feel that matters. They get us fighting over the situation in Israel, also fighting over the situation that's unfolding in the Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine. Get us fighting over everything. And then you bring in, and many who are coming into this country are, a large number are from the Islamic world. And so they bring in a different world perspective. We're talking about individuals, people who individually are great, but collectively they bring in a worldview which is at odds with what are widely perceived to be traditional Western democratic values. It's like it's a fifth column. It's like a Trojan horse. They're coming in. We're democratic. We grant citizenship. We grant the right to vote. And if you look at birth rates among those who profess the Islamic faith versus birth rates among those who profess the Christian faith, they're entirely out of whack. Muslims tend to have large families. Christians tend to have small families. And so we're seeing the erosion of our society. And it's been going on for 50 plus years. And this is where I say, the title of this video, everything's come together in almost a perfect storm at us. The whole climate change debate, and it shouldn't even be a debate. Climate changes. We know this. It always changes. It always has. It always will. But now tying it in back to the vaccines and these new variants. And of course, now we have bird flu that is said to be infecting dairy and beef cattle. So now I have to ask, are they at some point going to use this as justification for the euthanizing of millions of beef and dairy cattle and to force us to eat crickets for high value protein? There's a lot coming. And it's been a thesis statement of mine for a long time that the Great Reset is one book co-authored by Klaus Schwab. Another is called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the fourth industrial revolution puts forward this concept of, it's called stakeholder capitalism. And here's my take on stakeholder capitalism. The George Soroses, the Rockefeller types, the corporate world, they are the holders, and you and me, the schlubs, we're the stakes. They want to hold us. The WEF, World Economic Forum, had 5 or 6 years ago, before COVID came out, they had this ad campaign saying, you will own nothing and be happy. That's the idea. You will own nothing. Property becomes an extension of people's identity. My name's Gordon. I own this house. This is my car. This is how we express ourselves and make our value known to the world. There's a good side and a bad side to it, but they want to take that away, where they own everything and that we're just renters. And that's the idea. And by bringing in mass immigration, this whole notion of overpopulation on the planet, it's not the Western world's problem. If you take the Western world, Canada, US, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, take the Western world as a whole, we don't have enough kids in our part of the world to maintain our populations. Japan has a very low birth rate, and yet Japan has not engaged in what Canada and the US are, and Western Europe, with this mass immigration. And Japan's hanging in there. Sure, they have some challenges with an aging workforce and strain on the economy, but it's not breaking them. Anyway, I would invite you to watch George's video on that. It's excellent. Just going to read up the last few comments. So Townhouse Gardner says that Soros is Jewish and is funding the Palestinian side of the protest, not the Jewish side of the protest. That's how you can tell he's a disturber. Okay, but so and then I'm catching up, so I know when she wrote this, she wrote it when I was talking about it. Okay, but so that Tehran and Palestine and all those Islamic countries follow their Islamic teachings, and we should condemn them. I'm sorry, you wrote that sentence. I know you're typing quick. So, and we should condemn them. You know what? My attitude has always been, you look after your house, I'll look after mine. As long as you don't try and take over mine, all well and good. If Iran wants to practice Sharia law and all that stuff, and flog people, commit adultery and kill anyone caught in a homosexual act or whatever, their country, their rules. The issue I have is when it's imported here, for obvious reasons. Now, Townhouse says, in the Bible, God, not Jesus, God says that any man who shall adorn woman's clothing is an abomination in my eyes. Again, that would be in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, where there were hundreds of rules, hundreds and hundreds of rules. And Jesus represents a new covenant. Those old rules were for that time, for that people before the cross. Now we have the cross. So we don't have to be perfect. Anyway, Townhouse says Soros is Jewish and is funding the... You wrote the same, looks like you wrote the same thing twice, or cut and paste, Townhouse. Anyway, covered off everything. I didn't touch climate as much as I wanted, but it's just another brick in the wall, to quote Pink Floyd. And the whole idea is they're not bricks in the wall, they're bricks being taken out of the wall, a wall that's the foundation of our Western society, our Western world, our Western way of life. They're pulling out the key supporting bricks one by one, and we're all fighting amongst each other, and it's going to come crashing down. And I could see a perfect storm coming. We have this invasion going on, and with Rafah right now, then we have these new COVID variants. They're talking about flirt. We've seen their capacity to scare the population. There are still people in my little town wearing masks outside. What are you going to do? And they're probably on jab number 8 or 9 and can't understand why they keep getting sick. And they think it's someone else's fault. What jab are you on? You're on jab number 8, 9, and you just had your 3rd COVID infection. It was really bad. You're going to start to put A and B together, and they're oblivious. They cannot make the connection. What are you going to do? And now they could come out very well and say, we have a new, this flirt is deadly, or the bird flu is deadly. And the only way these vaccines that we've come out with, these new RNA vaccines that we got, forget months, we got them done in days and weeks now. Everyone's got to take them or they won't work. That going on. We're going to have more climate emergencies, probably. We're probably going to have more wildfires like crazy. And the only ones who will be able to save us, here going back, Townhouse kept bringing up the Bible. I'll bring up the Bible. And Jesus said, beware of false Christs, beware of false prophets, beware of false teachers, false saviors. People will say, I will save you. Just hand over all your freedoms, hand over all your money. We'll take care of everything. We'll save you. That's what I see coming. The government is going to step in and they're going to present themselves and say, it's the Canadian government that will save you, protect you, keep you safe. And those who swap, those who trade their freedom, their liberties for safety will have neither. You won't be safe, and you won't have your freedom or liberty anymore. You'll have nothing. You'll be, we're heading to a period of slavery. And ultimately, faith is the only thing that you can fall back on. There's one name to which every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, and that name is Jesus Christ. We look at what's happening in Israel right now between people of Gaza and the people of Israel. Neither the people of Israel, the Jewish population, nor the people of Gaza, the Islamic population, neither of them accept Jesus as Lord and Savior. There are Jews who are Messianic Jews, but they're Christians. But both Islam and Judaism proclaim an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a life for a life. But Jesus said, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, and a life for a life. But I say unto you, take not an eye for an eye, nor a tooth for a tooth, but of everyone who asks of you, give. If someone asks for you to go a mile, go 2. If someone takes your shirt, don't deny them your sandals also. I forget the scriptural passage. It's probably in Luke. Anyway, I'll leave it there. God bless. Thank you for watching. 5 thumbs up. Thank you. A little endorphin rush. I'm at, 800. I'm coming up close to 900. Be nice to get over that. Would love to get the opportunity. I love talking to George on his station. I would love to get the opportunity to engage with people more like that on bigger platforms. And if mine grows, it allows me maybe to get my voice out there even a little further. So if you want to like and subscribe and hit the bell and all that stuff, I really appreciate it. And please comment down below. I try to respond to all, especially if it's a thoughtful comment, even if it's a critical comment. Last words from Townhouse Gardener. Let's see. She writes, okay, the Bible says we shouldn't be gay, and you'll get killed in Tehran or Palestine if you're caught. You know, if you can keep yourself hidden away, I think you might be able to live. If you are gay, so because they follow their is Islamic teaching and we don't follow our Christian teachings, we should condemn them when they're the ones that are being ungodly. It's the stupid talk to text. I knew there was something, because normally that's all right. And these thoughts get wrapped around in your brain. Sometimes I think I know where you're going with this. According to Christianity, homosexuality is sinful. Like Islam, Judaism, Christianity broadly agree on sexuality in terms of relations between people. It is only in a consecrated marriage between a man and a woman. End of story. Anything outside that paradigm is sin. The question is, what do you do with someone who's guilty of sin? Christians were guilty of sin. I'm guilty all day long. Yes, I engaged in premarital sex. I did not have a white wedding. Nowadays the expectation is that everyone will have multiple partners before they actually get married in a committed relationship. And I was part of that culture. And I recognize now that was sinful and wrong. And it's one of the things that when Jesus went to the cross and got, it's that sin along with many others are nailed to the cross. But in Islam and Judaism, there is no, they don't believe in the cross. So they don't believe that they have to inflict punishment. They have to inflict retribution. They have to practice condemnation. And sometimes it's corporal, stoning or execution, beheading. Hey, Jason King. Jason, you came on just in time for the end. I've been going on for an hour and 17 minutes. It's after midnight. We've now bled into Tuesday. Anyway, I'll see you all again in a few nights. We'll see what happens in the world. Stuff is happening all the time. Goodness knows it's early morning hours right now in Israel. Who knows what could be happening as I'm talking right now. The Houthis down in Yemen, as if they don't, Yemen's got its own problems. A civil war that's killed over 250,000 children under 5. And yet they're, we don't like what you're doing in Gaza. Well, what about what you're doing yourself? Why don't you just lay down your arms in Yemen? Why don't you look at the log in your own eye before looking at the speck in Israel's eye? You've killed 250,000 Yemeni children under the age of 5. A lot of them are starving to death because of your stupid civil war, but that no one cares about. Anyway, God bless everyone, and get into the Word. It's the only thing I can say, because things are going to I think things are going to continue on the way they have been, and they're going to get worse. But ultimately they get amazing. God bless.